Father Sam Schwartz and his wife Sadie, my grandmother. And Sam emigrated to the United States in about 1895, or shortly before that, with his two brothers, Yeno and Morris, both of whom went to New York City after they stayed with him for a year or two to learn English, and they are buried down there. My grandmother, Sadie, was a native of Hungary and lived in New York City, and she had a large family, and all of her parents and siblings are buried in the New York City area. Well, my forebears came from all over Europe, and most of the families, 3 out of the 4 basically, came to live in Albany, New York. I really don't know why that happened, but at that particular time when they came to the United States, Albany was, number 1, the 10th largest community in the United States, and number 2, it was the 2nd capital of all the capitals of the states in the country. Also, Albany was a very big trading center, primarily because of the river traffic from the Hudson River, which eventually could go all the way to the Great Lakes. With the construction of the Erie Canal, Hudson River basically was connected to the Great Lakes and permitted trade to go all the way to the Midwest in the 1850s. At that particular time, the Hirschbergers and the Ilches had come to Albany. In addition to all of that, Albany had a Jewish population that was approximately 6% of that 50,000, and they all lived in what was then known as the south end of the city. The south end of the city eventually came under the hammer, so to speak, of Nelson Rockefeller when he was governor of New York. When he was governor of New York, the state constructed what is presently known as the Empire State Mall. That mall is constructed on the site where many of the Jewish families lived in the so-called south end of Albany. So there was no way for me or anybody to go back to find the family homes that existed for the Ilches and the Hirschbergers back in those days. The first part of my family to come to Albany were the Hirschbergers. They came to Albany in 1848. Bertha and Nathan were the grandparents of my mother, Sophie, and they're buried in the cemetery here in Albany. The roots of my Ilch family ancestors is from Germany, in a little town called Fruchtenwagen, which is on the Romantic Trail. In 1933, a letter was received as a result of one of my cousins requesting it from the mayor of this town, who kept adequate records of all of the Jewish families that were there. And it indicates that the gravestone of great-great-great-grandparents of mine are buried in that town. Some of them born as early as 1757, Abraham Julia Ilch. And their grave sites I've never seen, but they exist according to this letter that was received before Hitler came into power in Germany. The 3 brothers of the Ilch family that emigrated from Germany are all buried in the Albany Cemetery, along with many of their descendants and my relatives, including my grandfather, my mother, and her siblings. Sam and Esther Perlmutter originally lived in a town which is now part of Hungary, and it was a town where Sam, who had been in the Hungarian army, retired, and he and Esther built a general store and a house in a small community. They had 8 or 9 children in that area, and then in 1884, the whole family picked up sticks from Hungary and moved to the United States. They located in New York City, and Sam had accumulated enough wealth at that time so that he could be a stay-at-home dad with all of his children. The children included my grandmother, Sadie Pearl. Sam Schwartz came to Albany, New York when he was about 20 or 21 years old. After he established himself in 1890 and the following years after that, he brought his brothers and a half-sister to Albany also. Sam originally located in New York City, but while he was in Albany, he would travel back to New York City, and he met a woman there by the name of Sadie Pearl. And they got married in New York City, and in 1896, my father was born in New York City, actually. And in 1900, my Uncle Morty was born in Albany, New York. So the Albany connection continued after approximately 1895, 96, somewhere around there, when Sam and Sadie did take up residency in Albany. My grandfather, Sam Schwartz, was a very aggressive person. He was generally known as the boss. He was a very smart businessman, and he was also an inventor. He patented an invention that was intended to prevent cotton from shrinking. Clewitt Peabody took up the patent and paid him royalties for several years. They lasted beyond his lifetime and went to my grandmother also. My mother, Sophie, and my father, Rudy, were both students at Albany High School, and I think they were in the same class. They both graduated, I think, in 1913. And they knew each other from the high school era, and my father went on to go to Union College, and my mother went to work in her father's store. She was then living on South Pine Avenue in a house that her parents owned, and it contained not only her parents and herself, but her sister and brother. That was Bert and Maury Ilch, and also Julius Ilch, a bachelor, uncle, and early on in her life, her father, Simon Ilch, who was alive. In any case, as time went on, Rudy finished Union College in 1917, then had to serve part-time in the U.S. Navy during World War I. After he was discharged from the Navy, in I think about 1919, he courted Sophie, and eventually in 1920, on June 21st, the longest day of the year, they got married. They spent their honeymoon in Atlantic City, which was a fashionable thing to do at that time. Well, this was the Ilch family residence, and it included Sophie Ilch, Bertina Ilch, Maury Ilch, Sig Ilch, Henrietta Ilch, and Sig's father or mother both may have lived here too. Here we are in the Bethlehem Cemetery of Temple Beth Emet, a very old cemetery which we found difficult to find, but we found it. And here lies my great-grandfather, Nathan Hirschberger. And they are the portion of my family that I know least about, but they came to the United States before any of the other portions of my family. Nathan Hirschberger would have been the first generation of my family here, and I would have been the fourth generation. Here we are at the gravesite of Simon Ilch, my great-grandfather, and this is the second branch of my family. And Simon married Celia Fleischman, and he was born in 1828, and they had
Okay.
had 5